Good afternoon and welcome to Stockbridge Library's online poetry series. This season, the theme is Sparks in the Dark, and we are lucky to have with us today two poets, Vivian Iyer and Margot Wizansky. They will be in conversation with John Gillespie, who started this program for the Stockbridge Library back in 2020. We're starting a little late, so I will turn the program directly over to the three of you. Thank you, Margot and Vivian, so much for joining us. And John, as always, thank you for bringing this program to us.
No, thanks for the library for hosting this. This is this is a very small production staff. So we get it all done. Um, so I can't do the split screen, Margot and Vivian. Maybe in my next life I'll be a tech wizard, but this life I'm trying to make my keyboard work on my laptop. So let's just start with this. Vivian and then Margot. So what did the Sparks in the Dark theme mean to you? When you were thinking about your program for today?
So first, to thank the library for sure. This is such a lovely thing that you do. And John also for hosting over these many years too. Yeah. Really, that's what we count on. We spoken word people is to have people listen to us. Margot and I are writing buddies. We're in the same writing group. And we both had our books come out about the same time. The name of my book is Ishmael's Violets. The name of Margot's book is Yellow Sweater. And they were both published by Kelsey Books. And so Margot and it's always more fun to read together. And Margot and I were trying to figure out how would it work, because Margot's book has a lot of family memories, which she'll tell you about. My book is about the ruined marine world and what's happening to endangered species. And so when we started to read our poems, look at our poems back and forth, we realized that there were really connections and resonances between the human species and the marine species. And that's really how we came up with this idea of calling our reading Fragile Families.
Great. Love it. Margot, what's your take?
Well, I think poetry is sparks in the dark. And when I set out to write a poem, well, I don't really set out. I guess I wait for the spark to hit me. And I try to figure out what it is, or it tells me what it is. It's a kind of a mysterious process.
No, I love it. No, I love the message part where it just comes from sometimes an unknown place.
Right. And my book, if you've seen, well, you saw the cover on the announcement, I think, maybe. Yeah. It's a pastel of a nude without a head. It's just the body. And it turns out that my father did that pastel in 1936, the night he met my mother at a life drawing class. It somehow survived for more than 80 years. And I just had it framed recently, and I decided to call the book The Yellow Sweater. It's not a poem I'm going to read today, but it is the first poem in the book about how my father and my mother met. And she heard me read it, and I thought I had made up the story. I didn't know anything about the Yellow Sweater, but I knew that they had met in a life drawing class. And she said, I don't know why I wore that yellow sweater that night. It was too tight.
Oh boy. So how so just one little question. How soon after the meeting did he do that portrait, or was it years later?
No, he did that at the Life
Oh, he
Drawing,
did that at the thing. He was yeah.
1936. That and they married in 37.
I love it. I met the woman I'm going to marry. I drew a picture. I showed it to her, and now we're going to get married. I love that. It's all in one sentence.
Yeah, it happened like that. Mm.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. So, Vivian, do you want to kick off with
Sure.
because I love the fragile species. I don't know. I think all the species, wherever they are, I don't know what's happening on the moon, but here on Earth, I think the fragility factor is at an all-time high. So, I'll be very interested in your poetry on this.
Well, the way we're going to do it is Vivian is going to read one, then I'm going to read
Yeah,
one.
great, fantastic.
And I will end with a poem in honor of Valentine's Day that isn't one of the fragile species.
Yeah, and one thing that's probably different, Margot, from when you read the last time, we kind of have a little break at the halfway point where we
Okay,
have the audience if they want to ask a question or
sure.
provide with a comment and stuff like that. So, but
Fine.
Vivian,
Okay, so John, you'll cue us in on when the break is
yeah, I
because,
will. I will. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay, terrific. Okay, so just for the audience, we'd like you to listen to the connection, right, between the human and the marine life. So here I go. Will I start off with a poem entitled What the Sea Told Me? Lately, I've been practicing to stay. I stand here like a seawall. It's too cold to sit down. At the water's edge, scored with rollers, there's a glacial moraine, flat topped like a seat. Maybe it's a chair rock where the ancients once sat with their guides at sunrise, asking for the sea's blessing. In this kingdom of slate gray waves, I have slipped far down into myself. On cobbles of feldspar and quartz, my fears rise. If only I had paws or a leaning stick to walk across what doesn't give. A rush of wind through my coat, that old urge to turn away, that old way to flee. It came to me like a person. What changes me is outside of me. The riprap loosens, a kind of grace, how I found this cove. Without the asphalt road cutting through the corridor of pines, lofty shadows, juncos, and sparrows, without the villager's hand-sketched map, I never would have heard the sea's words. Come closer.
Mm, love that.
My
Great.
my father never told me. The year of his bar mitzvah, his father died suddenly. Things he didn't talk about. He never sang again, only whistled sometimes. His mother remarried the plumbing supply king, who refused to have teenagers in his house. So she left my father and his sister alone in the apartment. Did his mother come back to wash his clothes, put up dinners, while her new husband sold clean out? Her death certificate says divorced, but when? What grounds? He must have gnawed on her absence in that cramped apartment, must have taken it to school, let it lunge after him on the playground. His 15-year-old face already shattered with new beard, his shirts unironed, no forgiveness in him, holding on to the hurt that grew while he sat bitter on his brown tweed chair for the rest of his years, listened to the days dwindle down to a precious few, dead at 54, just like his father. Oh, his stuttering heart. He never told me how bad it was.
The circle of several centers. It was all visible at the water's surface. How the mother orca swam, pushing her calf in front, or carried its body on her forehead swelling, or in her mouth, which meant she couldn't eat. Was she trying to rouse, spark, kickstart the lungs, the way hope can be part reflex? The mist of 30 blowholes behind the mother wake, each whale taking a turn to push. How wide is the circumference of loss? Whether the sky was moonlit or moonless, and by the sun's travel lamp she swam, pushing, carrying her calf 100 miles in a circle, twice. It takes time to loosen the twists in a figure-8 knot, but how to square the heartbeats, briefly there, like tiny kicks inside a mother's belly as that mother folds the never-used onesie into a plastic bag. How big must a brain be to feel sadness? Mouthfeel of salt, swimming so close to loss, the closeness so visible above the water's surface.
My first time, the memory buzzes under my skin like neon. In my early 20s, before I understood my daily risk of harassment and humiliation, before I had grievances, before I knew I was entitled to grievances, I was at the gynecologist, wrapped in a Johnny, lying down on the examining table, knowing in the observing part of my brain that a nurse was supposed to be with me, afraid of what the doctor might find. And he entered the room friendly, an older man, asked me a few questions, and then commanded, "Slide on down here, Margot. I'm going to fill you full of cold steel."
Whale shot.
Oh boy.
Live stream on Instagram. Seated in a shallow craft, the red bikini girl, expanse of ocean, a blue-gray backdrop. With eyes flashing light, her lithe body swivels to smile at the camera lens. A voice, a long, thick shadow sidles up. A voice behind the lens says, "Oh my God, turn around, look." I see it. The orca's head rising, slick from the seamouth. Over Mystery's rim, sheening with suntan oil, her fingers skim the whale's thin, translucent skin. Know nothing of how oxides soak through. This one touch lifts this girl weightless from the gravity of her land body. Yes, I too have touched wonder, washed my hands without washing the one I touched.
An early case, 1961. Mother's elegance, her fashion sense, Christian Dior suit and pillbox hat, her buying trips to Paris, her talent for selling cocktail dresses to the rich, amounted to nothing the night her boss, widower and sole owner of that flagship department store, a palace, antiques everywhere, crystal chandeliers, white-gloved atomizer women spraying French perfume. And in the cafe, drinks 2 jiggers strong, whipped cream 5 inches high, invited her to dinner, and she, expecting the other buyers for drinks in his suite at the Waldorf Astoria, knocked on his door. He was alone, wearing a bathrobe, nothing else. She thought she'd interrupted his shower until he untied the bathrobe, let it hang open, and made her a proposition. Divorce your husband, marry me, and your children will want for nothing. Her broad smile dimmed and she composed herself, took her leave, trying not to register shock or offend him. Still, the next day he fired her. Her performance, he said. And for 50 years, she never told anyone, even after she was scooped up to run another fancy dress shop. Even after my father died without kicking that man's sorry ass. Even after Anita Hill testified. Well turned out at 90, wearing a silk scarf and 3 necklaces, still believing she'd asked for it somehow. Mother told me for the first time about the miserable sandwiches her boss had ordered in that night for dinner. White bread, buttered, with a little slice ham.
Floods. Again, the causeway floods. Rings of rising tides mark the road stanchions, the way you measure a child's height on a wall. Behind a line of cars, my car. Water deepening around the legs of the patrolman, guiding our turnarounds. I turn up the heater, turn on talk radio. A panel debates climate change. Brr, so much for global warming. One man snickers. The water's engine rolls out, sheet after sheet, sun glancing off the surface, like that Delacroix painting, where light glances off a bedsheet, where a man shows off his naked mistress to her husband by holding a sheet in front of her face. The husband shows no eyelash of recognition. He doesn't see what he's lost, the way we don't see how the rain increases its sumptuous weeping. Now I hear voices, the woman in the painting and this flooded causeway saying, take a long look. I'm not going to be here forever.
If the goddamn war hadn't happened, goddamn war. If my father hadn't worked nights at the shipyard, if he could have used his education in the law, if he hadn't had to help in the family business, medicine cabinets, if that family business hadn't gone under, if his father hadn't died so young, if my grandmother hadn't married again, left him alone to fend for himself, if he hadn't traded Xerox too soon, if he'd forgiven himself, if he'd moved us to a big house on Lehigh Parkway, if my mother hadn't clicked down the stairs in high heels, Chanel number 5, a backless dress for the cocktail party. If not for my father's leaky heart, if he could have spent his days trolling for tuna on the deep and warm and boundless, if the Phillies ever went all the way.
Ode to the cold, stunned sea turtle. Where in these nets of light, in this tide, can I find you? Once you knew how to nose out of the birth egg's shell, with moonlight and stars, your signs, to shimmy the downslope into the ocean blue. Your flippers quick slapped the undersea, a frantic rush to cross the salty vastness. All your senses trusting the way it's always been. How soundly you slept, blind stitched into a sea pocket, missing the cue of the water's slow cooling. The sea changes around us, changes us in ways we barely detect. I hope this isn't true. The only way I see how much the sea has changed is by losing you.
Margot, we're going to do a break after your poem.
Okay. If time could flow backward, my father would still dance the two-step in new cowboy boots he bought at the shop in the square. Everyone would eat the picture-perfect turkey I'd roasted, and we'd listen to Frankie play cello in the living room. The 22-pound tuna, untaxidermied, unglued from the plaque, commemorating the only prize my father ever won, would swim off Miami, the hook unhooked from its mouth. If time flowed back to our house on Ott Street, to the Chesterfield chair he collapsed in every night post-heart attack, the upholstery would be taut the day it was new. And his fake gold watch for the 25 years he worked at Surefit slipcovers, tucked into its velvet-lined box, would go back to Gerard Perregaux, the time before his children disappointed him with our separate mistakes, our first disagreeable mates, our salvage operations. My father's ashes would gather themselves to fly out of the Caribbean where mother casts them off Grand Anse Beach, cruise back to New York, aboard the Ocean Pearl in a cardboard box, his bones rattling all night.
Fantastic. So, Margot, one thing, my dad was an OBGYN, and I don't think he ever shared his hospital experiences. So I never heard the cold steel slogan. So, yeah.
I don't think that was typical.
I don't think it was typical either. Yeah.
Outrageous to say that to a young woman.
Yeah, totally outrageous. No, these poems have been absolutely fantastic. So let's have a little Barbara, I don't know if you've been at our readings before. So we have a little questions, comments. Kathy knows I always say, don't let the poets off easy. This is your time for your mini Spanish Inquisition. No, all in good sense, because this is more of a conversation with poetry, so we like to have everyone participate. So I know Kathy, I think, is still here. So Kathy, Elizabeth,
can you hear me, John? Am I on?
Yeah, you're here. I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. I can't figure out my video. I'm working on my phone because my computer died. I mean, not just electricity wise. I just wanted to make a comment about my thinking about the relationship between your two poems, your two books. I was thinking that I love how you're both honoring either family members or elements of the ecosystem, the ocean ecosystem, and that, one of your poems, Vivian, was an ode, but it seems to me that in many ways a lot of your poems are odes, in that sense of celebrating something, sometimes something that that is unexpected. But I've really enjoyed the way that you've gone back and forth too. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you.
I'll add a few comments. Vivian, I think a couple of great lines. The circumference of loss, the rain's sumptuous weeping, just some great alliteration there for me. And then Margot, I feel like I was, watching a movie from the 50s and 60s. I had to go get my popcorn and stuff. What was Dad doing? But no, I mean the sadness of, I guess his mom marrying someone else and they couldn't live in the house. It's tragic. It's beyond sad. And no, it's just they're very personal, very compelling. So as I feel like I'm waiting to get invited to, I know somewhere in Massachusetts, a family dinner or something, so I can, see the remaining characters here. No, it's absolutely great. I love it. I love it. Barbara or Elizabeth, any? Barbara, you're on mute. You're on mute. You got to unmute.
Both poets express such a depth of their feelings of loss in this case. And it makes you want to think that, is there hope somewhere in order to handle or live with and accept this loss without it being overbearing, because both losses, family and the kinds of things that are going on in our climate are huge. They're at your core in this case. Yeah. They're just beautiful. They're really just wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Can I just speak to that though? I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, Barbara, you put your finger on something that I have been trepidatious about it reading from my book, which is definitely, to advocate for marine species. Mm-hmm. I was just saying to a colleague of mine a couple of days ago, maybe this is all too sad, to your point of, where is the hope? But, it's an interesting thing about if any of this touches you in a way that you might want to do something, and whatever that something might be, it's just such a small thing. Like, I'll just say one thing, like, let's talk about marine debris. Like we are all used to recycling and doing all of this. But what we forget is that the wind works against us. Because if a little girl has her little balloon from her birthday party, and that balloon somehow her grip isn't tight enough, that winds up in the sea. Like everything, every scrap of paper on the street or any woodland or anywhere is going to wind up in the sea, right? So it's beyond. It's beyond recycling. It's sort of, I'm hoping what I'm doing is sort of saying, what you just said, like, is there hope? Yeah, there's hope. Like we could pick up scraps,
Yeah. No.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, it just reminded me the one ode on the turtle reminded me of when my daughter was away watching the sea turtles emerge and get to the water, and you see in that, yes, there's loss, but there's also hope along with it. So anyway.
Okay, back to our regular scheduled programming, live from we don't know where. Vivian, go ahead.
Yes, okay. Letter to Sereno Edward Bishop, the 12-year-old cabin passenger on a whaling vessel. Were you a little night bird flying into the fire on the schooner's deck? Were you like moonlight that strobed the lonely faces of whalemen as you traveled alone to an unknown divinity school? You have to love a thing to study it. More closely than the seabirds circling the deck, you studied the men who caught 3 albatrosses, although it was Sunday. The birds can't fly after they're on the deck, or walk It's ridiculous. The cruel mesh of the foot, the missing hind toe, the wobble to stand up, wings seesawing, the birds falling over. They killed and skinned them, you wrote, but you didn't say how or why. You must have stood on that deck, your souls bloodied from bird and whale. Did a frayed invisible light shield you from the I don't care ways, from the wheel of the day? You must have carried those shiny parables to divinity school inside your chest, a nest of ashes.
I didn't know the earth was dying. Nothing was perishable. Nothing was miraculous to me either, not even the sun. Its multiple orbs illuminating every living thing. Trees lifting their branches to meet it halfway. Cabbages rolling their roundness toward it. The deep, abiding sun I knew nothing about in my 20s, hardly looked at, shades drawn, could have been shining or not. And I miss the brushstrokes of all the starry nights, focused on that great burning in my center, a mystery interesting only to me. I wasn't singing to an abundance of world, didn't detect any force or light. I wrote a little at the edge of things, couldn't move past the turmoil in my head. Is a poem a kind of litany? Was it only once when I was a girl that I skated to the outside of town on a frozen stream, miraculous, ephemeral? I looked down at fish and leaves, frozen together under clear blackness.
Edit in gasps of wonder. Although the channel was off limits, he was steering there. For the tip jar to fill, they had to see whales. The baby whale backflipped away from its mother. From the sun deck, this was clear. That single breath geysered too close to the boat. Like this, he'd said, rocking his hands side by side, how the both shook when the baby whale and its mother swam under the hull, like a minivan and a double-wide bus. It took time to cut the engines, he'd said. Sitting next to him at the dive bar, I could picture those white pleated torpedoes, that velvet rushing toward four-blade propellers. It was useless to ask if the whale's skin had been scraped or gashed. He was swallowed by the oh from a coterie of tank tops, buying rounds to salute that onboard day. I heard him say, "Who will cruise with me tomorrow?"
The black slacks. At the boundary waters of her decline, my little mother decides she needs new black slacks. So thin from salting her food, forgetting to eat, I'm trying to find her what fits. My little mother's decided she needs new black slacks. In the dressing room, she holds a pair in her hands. I'm trying to find her what fits. She can't remember if she's about to try them on or take them off, the pair she holds in her hands. She knew retail, high end. It was her life. She can't remember if she's about to try them on. Slacks on the floor, on the chair, lopsided on hangers. She knew retail, high end, it was her life. Soon we find a rhythm. I hand her a pair. Slacks on the chair, the floor, on lopsided hangers. She tries, rejects them. I whisk them away. Soon we find a rhythm. I hand her a pair. After she tries them, I give her another. She tries them, rejects them, whisks them away. These fit, she says, the very pair she wore this morning. I'm fetching her another pair to try. So thin from scalping her food, forgetting to eat. These fit, she says, the very pair she wore this morning at the boundary waters of her decline.
Ooh,
Peak
beautiful.
memory. What do you think? My dad asks the shop boy in the marine supply store. I think they look great. The teen nods toward my dad's boat feet. I guess they did, considering the cracks across his orthopedic sneakers he'd been wearing. Plimsolls, Dad announces, remarkably, since he often calls me by my sister's name. Later, he'll ask me the name of these boat shoes. Sounds like a gin cocktail, umbrella, pimples, the pine-scented aerosol. Once I say Plimsoll, he'll say load line on hull, as if we were playing the game. What is it? It's the water line on the hull of a ship. If the sea rises above the line, cargo drenches. Here in this shop, Dad stare hypnotic in a full-length mirror. Staring at what? His tonsured head, half-moon pouches under his eyes, belly swell against the buckle's despair, the patch where the needles for dialysis bit. Okay, son, he says, not to the shop boy who's vanished, not to me. I want to believe that he's speaking to the part of himself before nautical twilight. The stars still bright enough to vessel out to sea.
A race car made of sand. Everything made my mother nervous. The baby crying, sand on the floor, the flies. So we went out to the beach. I took my bucket and shovel. My mother sat my little brother up on her shoulders and carried the towels and a canvas chair for my father. He'd had a heart attack and was too weak to carry anything. He wore his cabana suit, light green with white palm trees, his legs pale like the hotel room sheets. He hadn't shaved. His face had been bluish for weeks, the circles under his eyes, dark as his beard. Mother said I was too heavy to sit in his lap. All afternoon, I dug a string of frantic little ponds. Nothing was right. My back was sunburnt. My father hardly moved. Uncle Robert took a bus from the city to build me a race car of sand with jar lids for hubcaps and for headlights, clamshells. And he found a quoit on the beach for the steering wheel. He dug me a driver's seat that just fit and a rumble seat for my little brother. My father peeled me an apple with his penknife in one long piece that didn't ever break.
Provincetown lobster diver swallowed by a humpback whale on Jimmy Kimmel Live. Epigraph. I wasn't technically swallowed, the diver says. Jimmy says, I got a show to do. I'm going with swallowed. Inside the wide open mouth of a papier-mâché whale, that diver sits, knees bent, like a boy scrunched into a bumper car. Eyes shuddering, he recalls the sensation as if a car hurtling headlong into a churn of sea, whiplash raising his neck hair. Under the stage lanterns, his face reddens. The blush of death flushed out in front of a live audience. They laugh, teeth showing, like the laughter of Romans when lions rushed into the Colosseum. The songs of our indifference. From the farthest distance, I can glide into the diver's fears. My first terror, the dive, gulped into the sea's pit, my arms feeling paper thin. And dear whale, what did you feel when that force crossed your home's threshold and entered you? I know it's not right to imagine you feel like me, but you do use language after all. Something was wounded when that diver kicked you until you spit him out. My tongue touches scar tissue, the knotted line inside my cheek. My body is an archive with spectacles, emptiness, with resurrections, returning us to the abyss, to the gulf of communion, wider than a giant mouth agape.
Danger, after Tova Friedman. We stumbled into a dark, mud sliding our feet, thorny underbrush grabbing our ankles. Boys, neighborhood boys in those innocent woods, sitting on wooden crates they hauled in, sitting beside oily black water, maybe a swamp or a pond. Could have been cottonmouth snakes, could have been swamp rats swimming, could have been raped, could have fallen and disappeared. No street lights, no buildings to get our bearings. Giddy from the secrecy, giggling, drinking near beer with the boys, showing off their private secret high. Not fallen boys, just boys showing off, not touching, not sex. It wasn't danger. I didn't know danger. The barracks, Nazis stomping big black boots, danger. Your mother made you hide under a woman just dead, warm at first. You, so small and still, so small.
Whale watch after Kara Hoblin's watercolor, Whale. Whale, the color of moonlight, so pale I can see inside the body, the bones sketched in lamp black ink, the enveloping seas like bruises, aubergine, pink, hospital green. I want my arms around this body. I want the long, streamlined, knobby spine I long to touch before she breathes out of the sea, twirls acrobatically mid-air, plunges with one brash slap to break open the sea door. I want to caress the flesh ripped from the flare of the fluke by iron barbs, blunt force blows. I want the flipper, the bony flanges, so like a human hand in my hands, as light as a scrim of mist.
Good sleep. My mother said she never slept. She always slept on the very edge of her bed, as far away as she could get from her second husband. In places intended for wakefulness, in the library on a bench, or in a chair where she could disguise her dozing. She gave herself to sleep. In the first row orchestra at Much Ado, in front of the giant TV in the lounge, the Phillies night game grinding down, until the security guard woke her, walked her back to her apartment. A wakeful night after a day of many little sleeps. In the morning asleep, when her gentleman called to be sure she'd made it through. And when we drove her from Philly to Boston for the holidays, 6 hours in the back seat asleep. Such a good sleeper, my mother.
Margot, Vivian, let's take a little, let's take a little, one more little segment for the audience if they have any comments or questions, because we only have about 9 minutes left. So Barbara, Elizabeth, or Kathy, any final comments or questions? No? Very quiet today. You're taking up all the air with your poetry. There's nothing we can't. Uh-oh. Here we go. Now we got Elizabeth. Okay, here we go. Now we're going to start.
I'll ask a question. So, one of the tensions that I see between your two poetries is that, like Margot's is so, I feel like Margot's creates a sense of intimacy, and perpetuity with the use of memory. And Vivian, I feel like yours, often the memory actually almost seems like it enhances the sense of loss rather than reduces it. I don't know if that makes sense to you. And so I was wondering if you could think of places in your own poetry that you feel are closer to Margot's, and Margot places that you feel are maybe closer to Vivian's.
Well, I guess what I would say is I think the poem I just read, Speak Memory, about my dad, who was in the throes of, losing his memory, probably crosses the line, if we want to use the line here, to Margot's intimacy poems. That feeling of, if you've had someone in your family, they don't have dementia, they're still with it. They still want to have outings with you. You still want to have outings with them. But there's this undercurrent that something is happening, right? The person is not the same as they used to be. And I think that that's the crossover and also the link to my Ode to the Sea Turtle poem. I think what I was trying to do in the book is to say, I'm losing the sea turtle because of climate change, and the sea turtle gets caught in this, the expression I use, blind stitched into a pocket of sea. And my father's memory is kind of blind stitched into some kind of pocket too. And I'm kind of losing both of them. So I think I'm trying in the book. I mean, it's hard with just a few poems, but it's a good question, Elizabeth. Thank you for asking the question.
Well, I think it's the poem about your dad. It's such an interesting poem because in a sense it's your memory, but then it's also about his memory. So it's a little bit of a Russian nesting doll of what can we hold on to, and a poem in some ways can allow us to hold on to things, but what you're holding on to there is actually the loss, and it's really, I like the tension in that a lot.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that Vivian's poem, Speak Memory, really does connect to the Black Slacks, which is a pantoum, which was just so reflective of what that day was like shopping with her. And it's about the very slow decline,
Right.
the boundary waters. Also, the poem that I read, I didn't know the world was dying. It's kind of about me, not just on the edge of understanding or beginning to understand what was going on in the world, that there might be something outside myself that I ought to.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this was a lovely reading, so thank you both, and thanks to the parents of Bourne High School who did not sign up for any parent-teacher conferences so that I could listen to you.
Yes, we're thrilled. Please give them our best too. Yeah.
Elizabeth, we called the parents on your behalf and told them that their children were doing extremely well and there was no need to come in today. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
So
Vivian, you want to go at it again?
Yeah, we have two more poems and then the Valentine.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Yep.
So just to remind you that Margot just finished reading Good Sleep, and that poem ended with such a good sleeper, my mother. And now my poem is Power Naps. They're motionless, vertical, the mother sperm whale napping, with squid tentacles wilting from her mouth like ribbons quivering in the current. Her calf sleeps, tail standing too. They seem like carved shamans between peace and precipice. How those muscled bodies make me shiver. The large blunt heads, almost comical. The calicites, shaped like archipelagos. Are they dreaming? What is dream but clouds seeking abandoned shadows? I dream about glass-bottom boats, constellations, failing Latin, falling, finding a secret room in my house. Their spiracles are quiet. Do they dim the lights in the brain room to stop breathing? How starstruck I am when a gold vein slips through the crack of my unknowing. The futility of a sure thing. When would the pencil drop from Einstein's hand to wake him from a nap? Might Melville have written about a pale squid if he had seen this suspended grace? I read his mother guarded her precious afternoon naps, the bliss of slumber after repast, never belonging to others alone.
Exaltation. Every day, the rapture of birds, sunset approaching in red velvet shoes, leaving prints where the sky touches water, that radiance reflecting on the sea's flatness, dark blue-violet streaks I want to plunge my face into, improbable red blazes on the west side of every tree, fades to dusk, the ordinary story of night beginning. And soon the moon, the shiver of stars. Once in Oxford, I heard the Magdalen College boy choir, the only time I felt exaltation in a chapel. Those ruby bright, unbroken voices praising, no matter who they praised. their clear madrigals, soaring past a multitude of polychrome saints, scaling the Gothic arches to a place I'd never been, a place where I might fly.
Love it.
So Margot is just going to read a Valentine's poem, and then we'll bid you adieu.
We didn't think.
Vivian and Margot, it's been fantastic. Really.
Thank you. We just didn't think we could end without commemorating Valentine's Day. Loving. The Tupelos are dancing as they do every afternoon, dancing and twisting, pink gold on one side as the sun lowers, light climbing their trunks from grass to sky, pallid, wintry today. The Tupelos reaching out to each other, this gesture, a gentle dance, as if they've let go of passion that could open them like lightning, open them wide and vulnerable to wind. After, in the obsidian dark, my legs reach for your warmth, for the honey of your skin. Strange to say skin this old is honey. We've grown into each other, learned to accept the changes. Strange, too, to call this learning. It's not conscious like that, more like absorption, a taking in of each other. Like the Tupelos, let's dance and curl around each other as long as we can.
Beautiful. What a great way to end the day. This has been a fantastic hour.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, despite our technical difficulties. And Barbara and Elizabeth and Kathy, thank you for your comments and questions. Yeah, very, very special hour today.